Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. It's really nice to see this many people attending today's discussion. I would like to start by expressing our gratitude to the Institute for the Study of International Development at McGill University for making this event possible. And of course, a big thanks to our speakers for joining us today and for sharing your expertise and thoughts with us. Before we begin, let me introduce our speakers. Ernesto Schargrodsky is a full professor and director of the Crime Lab at Universidad Torcuato Di Tella. He previously served as socioeconomic research at CAF, director of socioeconomic research at CAF and president of Universidad Torcuato Di Tella. He has been a visiting professor at Stanford and a visiting scholar at Harvard, and he's a fellow of the Econometric Society. His work on crime, privatization, corruption, and economic policy has been widely published in top economic journals. Juan Pablo Luna is the inaugural Diamond Brown Chair in Democratic Studies at McGill University. His research focuses on Latin American politics, examining how social inequality, state capacity, and organized crime shape democratic institutions and development. He has authored several books, including Latin American Party Systems and Segmented Representation. Marina Dal Poggetto is the executive director of EcoGo Consultants in Buenos Aires. She previously served as deputy manager of macroeconomic analysis at Argentina Central Bank and chief advisor of the Ministry of the Economy. She has worked at Argentina's National Institute of Statistics, as well as consulted for international organizations like the IDB and UNICEF, and taught economics and finance at multiple universities. Nicolas Dujovne is a partner at TENAC Asset Management. He served as Argentina's Minister of the Economy from 2017 to 2019. Previously, he led the consultancy firm NDA, advised the World Bank, and was chief economist of Banco Galicia, among other roles. And I'm Lucila Pinto. I'm a journalist from Argentina based in Montreal, and I will be your moderator for today. So as you all probably know, we are here to discuss Argentina's economic landscape under President Milei's administration. We will explore his administration reforms, their political and economic sustainability, challenges and risks associated with them, and what lays ahead for Argentina. Each of our panelists will have 15 minutes for a presentation, and then we will open the floor for a Q&A, so start thinking about questions that you may have as our speakers are doing their presentations. Now let's begin. I will hand it over to our first speaker, Ernesto Schargrodsky.
Thank you very much, Lucila. Can you hear this? Yeah. And thank you, Nicolas, for the invitation. I'm going to divide my 15 minutes into 3 questions. First, how did we get here? Second, how are we doing so far? And third, where are we going? So let me start with how did we get here. You have to think of an stagnant economy performing below expectations for a long period of time after a glorious national past, and with a repeated failure of all traditional parties in overcoming this sense of stagnation. And in particular, a frustration in the lower socioeconomic groups from a failure or a betrayal from the political party that is supposed to represent them in improving their quality of life. And this creates a strong anger against the establishment. So in this situation, an outsider appears, initially with no party, no political party, very bad moods, active in social networks, with pro-market ideas, but at the same time with the ability to make them attractive to the poor. So this situation explains how somebody like Donald Trump appeared and came to power in democratic elections. Oh, sorry, this was on Argentina. I apologize. Okay, let me come back. I got distracted. So let's talk now about Argentina. So this is an stagnant economy for at least 50 years, performing far below expectations after a glorious national past. To give you some numbers, we had a peak in GDP when Nicolas and I were kids in 1974. Then there were significant crises, then there was a recovery in the 90s, a big crisis by 2001. There was another peak in GDP per capita by 2011, and now, 14 years later, we are something like 10% below that GDP per capita of 13 or 14 years ago. With the failure of the traditional parties, the old radical party, which radical doesn't mean the same than in English, a failure of Peronism, in particular the currently it's 21st century, the Kirchnerism, and also of a new party under the government of Mauricio Macri, the PRO, but in particular a failure in the representation of the lower socioeconomic groups by the Peronism or by the Kirchnerism in bringing to these groups improvements in quality of life and in security. And these are those very sensitive topics. One is the level of poverty, very related to inflation. And the other dimension, very important, is security or lack of security. And the poor are very sensitive to these two variables because they cannot protect themselves. So if there is high inflation, you do not have access to the financial market. In particular, whenever inflation increases, it runs, the salaries run behind inflation, so there is a fall in real wages. In particular, you have to think of an economy with very high levels of informality, so informal workers are very underprotected from increases in inflation. And then also insecurity, because if you are rich, you can hire private security, you can move to a secure neighborhood, you can buy insurance, but if you are poor, you are very unprotected from insecurity in the streets. So in this situation, again, an outsider appears with no party, very bad moods, active in social networks, with pro-market ideas, but at the same time with the ability to make them attractive to the poor, and that is now Javier Milei. And he had two main messages during the during the presidential campaign, or let's say three main messages. The two first were, I'm going to defeat inflation. He was saying through dollarization. We are not there, probably we are not gonna go to dollarization, but there was the first topic was to reduce inflation. And the second one, I'm going to kick off the establishment, la casta, from this anger, taking or capturing this anger in the society. And perhaps a third message, which is, I'm gonna bring order and security. And he was successful with these messages during the during the electoral campaign. Something for me important is that he's a plebeian. He's a plebeyo. He's not from the upper classes, which is more similar to Cristina Kirchner, not to, for example, Mauricio Macri or Donald Trump. So there is, he not only get the non-Peronist or anti-Peronist support in Argentine society, but also he was able to talk and to capture the support from disenchanted Peronists, people from the lower class, particularly self-employed, and particularly a very large juvenile support, particular for male, people somewhat tired or upset with wokeism, and he attracted those votes. He was getting growing support. There were 3 rounds of elections because there is first a primary election, then a general election, and then a ballotage. And with this growing support, he won the election. But because of the design of these rounds, he has very weak own Congress power, a low presence from his party in the chambers in Congress. So this is how we got here. It sounds to me like a reasonable explanation. Let me give you a disclaimer, which is I didn't expect Milei to win. If you talk to me during that electoral process, I would say, if Milei wins, the Argentina that I know does not exist anymore. This is a different Argentina. Because I didn't capture at that time these changes. So the second question, how are we doing so far? In spite of this weak Congress support, the government implemented a huge fiscal adjustment, which in my interpretation was the root of our macroeconomic disequilibrium and our poor economic performance. The fiscal adjustment was much larger than expected and than thought possible by most people, by most economists. To give you some numbers, but Nicolas and Marina, they follow the macroeconomic numbers better than me, but we went from a deficit of minus 4.8 points of GDP in 2023 to a surplus of plus 0.3 last year, and maybe we are at 0% or at equilibrium. I'm talking about the total national government budget for 2025. The adjustment came mainly from the fiscal adjustment, from a reduction in expenditures, not from an increase in taxes. In terms of GDP, again by the national government, because we are a federal country, so you also need to count the provinces and the local governments. But the reduction in expenditures went from something like 19.6 of GDP to 15.3, so it matches most of the fiscal adjustment. And that gave, with this, I mean, mainly fiscal decision, this gave a very successful stabilization program. The program was quite simple. There was a large initial devaluation, followed by a crawling peg, using the dollar as a nominal anchor, and this very large fiscal adjustment. Inflation went down very significantly from more than 200% in 2023 to more than 100% in 2024, and maybe something like 30% for this current year. The economy had fell by 1.6 of GDP in 2023 and by 1.8 in 2024. So the recession was not that large, given the size of the fiscal adjustment. People would expect a much larger recession with that fiscal adjustment. It didn't happen. There was a reduction. And we probably going to be growing something like 5% for this current year. And that meant that poverty fell significantly. So there was an increase relative to the second semester of 2023, an increase in poverty in the first semester of 2024, and now we just got the numbers with a significant reduction in poverty for the second semester of 2024, even like 4 points or 3.6 points by the Argentine measure, which is quite stringent of poverty relative to the second semester of 2024 relative to the second semester of 2023. There are some economics problems I'm going to mention in a couple of minutes. So the program gave an exchange rate over appreciation. We have weak reserve accumulation, and there is a current uncertainty that I'm going to come back. But there was also a second part, which is a significant improvement in order and security. Security is, in several opinion polls, now that inflation came down and now that the economy is recovering, usually one of the three main concerns of the population, and in some opinion polls now is the first concern of the population, even though Argentina is much better than the rest of the region, but there is a significant concern. And let me give you one example, which is the city of Rosario. Rosario is the most dangerous city of Argentina. It is the third city in size, and the homicide rate is like 5 times the national average. And in Rosario, there was something called the Operativo Bandera, flag operative, which included a tightening of prison conditions, perhaps a la Bukele, not like Bukele in terms of massive incarceration, but in terms of what happened inside prisons, with forbidding the use of cell phones inside prisons, separating gang leaders from their groups, controlling outside visits, a tightening of prison conditions. There was an increased deployment of federal security forces in the city and a better coordination between the federal security forces and the provincial police. And in 2024, relative to the previous year, there was a reduction in homicides of 65%, which is a huge reduction. So there are results in terms of security and also in terms of public order. It is it has been extremely frequent for the last, 20 years or more in Argentina, in particular in Buenos Aires, a large number of manifestations and pickets interrupting the streets, particularly in downtown Buenos Aires. There was a quite criticized anti-picket security protocol. There was something complex to explain in a few minutes, but there was a disintermediation of the assignment of social welfare programs, because we had a crazy thing that the political organizations were deciding who to give, who were the beneficiaries from these programs, and they were giving naming the beneficiaries with the condition that you had to participate in this manifestation and in these pickets. So there was a disintermediation, and the money was being put by the national government. So that system was disintermediated, and there is something like a reduction of more than 50% in this, the number of these street pickets, which again hurt particularly the low or middle to low socioeconomic groups that had to go to work and got a highway or a street or an avenue cut. So this is a summary of where we are now. The the government has, with this program, has quite still strong, quite reasonable popular support, according to opinion polls. Perhaps it is weakening. Perhaps it is weaker in the Buenos Aires metropolitan area than in the interior. It is combined with a large crisis and disorganization in the opposition parties. And I had to mention this. This also came, if you are a moderate, if you are a more or less politically centered people, with a tough folklore. So something that difficult to swallow, leaving aside this economic decision, with permanent polarization on every social, cultural, or historical topic from the government, probably because the government benefits from creating this polarization, and also some groups in the opposition also benefit from this polarization. Where are we going? For me, I mean, the coin is still in the air. This is Argentina. You cannot say that, for example, that Peronism is over. You never had to say that in Argentina, or that inflation is over. In the short run, the government has important economic challenges. The main challenge is how to overcome a real exchange over-appreciation, a real exchange adjustment in a situation of weak reserves without a large pass-through on inflation, which also means without a large pass-through on popular support in an electoral year, because we have elections. We have a lot of elections in several provinces starting next month till national midterm elections in October. There is a challenge of lifting the cepo, the capital controls that we have still in Argentina, implementing a new monetary regime, perhaps with some dirty flotation, and in the next 2 or 3 weeks, signing a new agreement with the IMF. So that's a main challenge, an important challenge for the government. Another challenge is how to keep in the political front political support, if in particular there has to be some depreciation that raises again some inflation, and in a political environment of, like I said, a lot of polarization and fragmentation. Perhaps, I mean, looking even further, I really don't know whether, coming back to this idea of whether the Argentina that I know still exists or it doesn't exist, I don't know whether the distribution of preferences in the population has a unimodal form, and because of this stagnation and because of the dynamic of political process, we have a president now more on the right, and then the pendulum is going to come back, let's say at some point, to the center, or whether we have an Argentina with a more bimodal society in which at some point the pendulum may come back to the left. I really don't know, and that's very important, and that's very important for the people that may think of investing in Argentina. So it's not only a question for the future, it is a question that also affects the present.
Thank you, Ernesto. Now we will hear from Juan Pablo Luna.
Okay. Is this working? Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks so much for the invitation. I'll start by confessing this is a bit intimidating. Argentina is always difficult to get, particularly if you are not Argentinian. I'm Uruguayan. Uruguayans look at Argentina as Canadians do with the US. I mean, we look at Argentina to feel better about ourselves, but that doesn't mean we understand what's happening in Argentina. So.
And you will get annexed anytime.
Of course.
It's a threat of annexation.
Yeah. Fortunately, you didn't threaten us with that yet. So please discount my bias and limitations. So what do I see from that standpoint? I was trying to prepare for this talk. I was trying to watch different TV shows and journalist sources on Argentina this past 2 weeks. And there's a lot of arrow about the IMF agreement, the exchange rate, whether, I mean, there is kind of a sensation, I would say, that we are almost in 2001 again, right? And some people is claiming that there is a new social uprising building up and on the brinks. I might be completely wrong. Remember, this is Argentina. I'm not an expert on the case, but to me, I mean, the situation seems very different from the one we had in 2001. Milei continues to be very popular. He has around 40%, as you were just saying in opinion polls. My sense is that he has a very good chance of doing well in the midterm elections. I also feel that might not be enough for him to succeed at the end, but at least, I mean, I think he will do well and get and continue to get the opportunity to eventually change things as we knew in Argentina. So in the time I have left, I want to address 4 questions that I think might make sense for looking this case and at this country from outside. Why did Milei win? Why does he continue to be popular in spite of the static and not that aesthetic also, I mean, performance we have seen so far? Why his success or his likely success in the midterm elections might be insufficient in terms of his ability to crystallize his project for the country? And finally, I mean, how to put Argentina and the Argentinian political trajectory in comparative perspective, thinking more broadly about what we have seen in Latin America and in other party systems in contemporary society. So why did he win? Essentially inflation, right? And tied in inflation and the problem of inflation with this idea of la casta. 4 years of, as already has been said, a broken promise in terms of what democracy had delivered in terms of social incorporation, in terms of development. This glorious past feeling more and more distance over time in spite of politicians and traditional parties fighting very harshly in the last 2 decades, I would say, about the narrative on Argentina, both essentially becoming illegitimate in front of society, and this being catalyzed by the last inflationary crisis that obviously takes a toll and a heavy toll on the poor and on middle classes. Right? He put together kind of a dual constituency of people that at the wealthier and the poor. And I think for that it was crucial that the poor got disillusioned with not only the Peronists, but also with the state, and I will have something to say about that from a perspective of like how we can think of Argentina in a comparative perspective. Why has he declined in terms of his popularity in the last few months? Many people is referring to this crypto scandal. My sense is that that is only relevant to people that is highly informed about politics. My sense is that he overstepped, and his party has overstepped in the sense of trying to broaden this cultural battle to include issues like the legacy of the dictatorship, the like human rights violations, and kind of like during the dictatorship and undermining that the importance of them. His fight with the pension beneficiaries, and this had him having to step back in terms of pension benefits and so on. But still, I mean, I think in spite of all those mistakes, the inflation and the success with inflation is enough to, against the backdrop of the recent years in Argentina, to still explain why he continues to be very, very popular in spite of all mistakes he has made on trying to fight this cultural battle. Why is he likely to continue in like being popular as he is now? It has already been said. In addition to inflation, I think the question of order and security is an important one. I have some caveats on the Rosario story that you told. We can discuss that eventually in the Q&A. I'm not sure that the Rosario story is only a story that has to do with what the government has done in terms of security strategy. I think it also has to do with vertical integration that is happening in terms of the criminal markets in Rosario, and kind of like the integration between the micro-trafficking markets and the macro-trafficking markets outside of Argentina that go through Rosario, and that has provided the criminal side of the equation incentives for reducing violence. And that's kind of like volatile, right? I mean, and it can change, and the types of pacts that are like hidden behind such a drastic reduction of homicides as you have seen in Rosario might have also risks embedded on them. But that's like a side on order. But Argentina is doing well. I mean, in a context and in a region in which criminality, violence, homicide rates are extremely worrying to the population, Argentina is the best place where you can be. Right? That also has to do with police corruption, and I will say something about police corruption, but the way through which Argentina reduces homicidal violence has to do with the coordination by the police of the criminal markets. Right? So you have a lot of crime in Argentina, property crime in Argentina. You don't have homicides. That has to do with what's known about as the double delegation pact that politicians and the police implement in order to reduce violence. That has implications for corruption that might eventually get to Milei at some point. But the other reason that why I think Milei is doing well and will do well in the elections has to do with what the opposition has been doing, right? I mean, what you have on the side of the opposition is fragmentation in fighting. The PRO is fighting for the Ciudad de Buenos Aires. This is opening chances for Milei to even win Ciudad de Buenos Aires in the midterms, and that would be like a very harsh hit for the pro. And the Peronists are fighting like crazy for Provincia de Buenos Aires as well, right? And in this fragmentation and in this infighting, Milei, who doesn't have a party yet, who doesn't have a reasonable congressional delegation, might end up getting many of the seats he needs in order to lead in his the second part of the term. The other thing I think it's interesting for explaining Milei's success and continuing popularity is that to understand Argentinian politics before, I mean, you had to look at Provincia de Buenos Aires, right? And Provincia de Buenos Aires and eventually the city of Buenos Aires was the key to understand how the country worked politically. My sense is that the political economy of elections in Argentina has changed radically with Milei. Milei's base has to do with and this is also related to this dual constituency of very rich people and very poor people, with a very strong electoral constituency in the interior provinces. And this includes the most dynamic, the soy provinces of the Zona Núcleo, but also the very poor northern provinces that also turned out for Milei very, very strongly. And this is a different political economy in which he, through fiscal federalism and working with the governors, can eventually traction votes in Congress to move his projects forward, eventually with some independence of what happens with the Provincia de Buenos Aires and the city of Buenos Aires. So if we look at Argentina more broadly and with aside to the interior, I think he looks more stronger than what we can get by looking at Provincia de Buenos Aires or the city of Buenos Aires. Why, in spite of all this, might Milei be trapped in the second part of the term? Argentina has a system of partial renewal, so even if he does very well in these elections, that will probably not be enough to get him the majorities he needs. Fragmentation also runs against himself, so like congressional bargaining has to be more piecemeal, and he has to log roll a lot in Congress to eventually get the projects passed and approved. You have obviously, I mean, the fiscal front and the economic front, and he seems to be in kind of an economic, a Chinese shoe. I mean, in the sense, he has this kind of like exchange rate problem. If he devalues, I mean, that creates inflation. If he doesn't devalue, people is not selling soy and exporting soy, and therefore there are less reserves in the economy and so on. You can speak much broadly about that, but there are problems in terms of the political economy of how he transitions out of the crisis that he's now in. And the other thing I would say that it's, to me, important is that if you look at Argentina, it's probably one of the cases in which the judicialization of politics is more extensive, right? You, like for governing, you need to have some leverage in the judicial system and in the judicial branch and in the Supreme Court. Milei, two nominees for the Supreme Court are apparently not going to be confirmed by the Senate, and if that is so, even if the pro is gets weakened during this process and given this infighting, Macri will still control the judicial system, and that it's a problem for Milei, and Milei has to deal with that problem in ways that we don't see that as being that easy. I'll take 2 minutes and I'll finish. So let me just say a few words about like how I think Argentina might be interesting to get us thinking about what's happening more broadly in other cases. Argentina was a case. I mean, if I had to describe Argentina like 2-3 years ago, I would say, well, it's one of the most stable party systems in Latin America, along with El Salvador, along with Uruguay, along with Chile. And in Argentina, you had two blocks. You had polarization, you had La Grieta, right? And you have the Peronist and the anti-Peronist structure in the political system. In an election, you went from horizontal polarization to vertical polarization, right? In which like a new guy comes from nowhere and essentially confronts the whole political system and displays the whole political system. And now the Grieta is gone, right? I mean, and we thought that the Grieta was so fundamental in terms of structuring Argentinian politics. And that's a dynamic that we are seeing in other places in Latin America and around the world. The second thing I already mentioned has to do with crime and the importance of crime in Argentina, and I think that might eventually get into become a more fundamental problem, particularly if this pact with the police starts to crack down or break down, right? And this also implies that the police is a very powerful actor in Argentina in terms of also being central to, for instance, repressing protests if there are protests, right? I mean, so the relationship between the government and police forces might get into tension in some time, and I think that might be crucial for Argentina. And finally, I mean, I think what Pablo Semán has called mejorismo, which is this notion that the poor in Argentina, particularly the youth and the poor in Argentina, defected from the state, right? And in a sense, you have poor people and poor guys, very young, that would have been the target for like public policy and social policy and so on, as we thought of social policy and we think of social policy in terms of like from public policy schools, from government schools. Those guys are saying, I mean, get the state out of my life, right? I'm an entrepreneur. I like go with my bike and like work for Rappi or for Uber Eats, right? I'm a business guy. Let me be a business guy. Get the state out of my life. And I think that's something we are also saying in other places. And to me, it's problematic because it's fundamentally curtailing one of the main mechanisms that we have for improving people's lives and from like changing society for good that has to do with state institutions and state policies that eventually are designed to do so. So in a way, I mean, the trajectory of Argentina of 40 years of broken promises regarding that state role in society are creating this backlash and feeding this backlash that eventually end up curtailing what politics and public policy can do for improving society. Thank you.
Thank you, Juan Pablo. Now over to Marina Dal Poggetto.
Well, thank you for the invitation. I will try to talk after both. I will talk about the economy mainly. just to put in context, a short story of the country in the last 52 years since the beginning of the democracy. In 52 years, the country got 2 high crises. One was a hyperinflation at the end of the 80s, another hyperinflation, and a restructure of the deposits, of the savings of the people. After that, at that moment, the only problem of the society was to reduce inflation, and they voted for Menem. He won with a very different speech, but he implemented the convertibility regime. The convertibility regime allows to reduce inflation fast, and that program ended in another big crisis at the end of the 20s, in 21. That was a crisis, a default. That was another restructuring of the deposits. At that time, the problem was the high unemployment, 25% of unemployment in an economy with very low inflation. So I think that's the society of Argentina. Argentina is moving from one place to the other place. After that, we've got a stabilization program. They reduce inflation. 2 years later, inflation rate reduced to 3.6 annual rate in 2003. The economy started growing at a fast pace. They reestablished the financial system with a asymmetric specification. And at that time, they restructured the debt, and the country got another opportunity with a twin surplus and with a war that allows the most Latin American economies that exports commodities, a big opportunity. And we lose the opportunity. With the Kirchnerismo, they try to push the economy up with a fiscal and inconstant, a very expansive fiscal policy, income policy, and monetary policy. That allows the country to grow at a very fast rates, near Chinese rates, since 2003 till 2011. And we lose both the fiscal and the current account deficits. And we put a capital controls, a CIPO, in 2012. Since 2012, Argentina is stagnant. It's stagnant. If you see the path, we fell in non-electoral years, grow in electoral years, 2012, 13, 14, 15, Macri won the election. 16, he made the correction in relative prices. 17, again. 18, 19, that was the financial crisis, the COVID crisis, and then we return to the same level. To get to the same levels as 2012, we push up inflation from 25%, that was the average, till 15 at the end of Macri administration, until 200 at the end of Alberto Fernandez administration. In the 3 months before Milei arrives, inflation was 12% per month. That was the situation. A stagnant economy with very high inflation, and with the 2 political parties discussing who indebtedness the country more, if Macri or Cristina. That was a discussion in Argentina. Well, Milei won the election. And Milei won the election with a speech talking about dollarization. No? He promised the dollarization. And the promise of dollarization with a central bank balance sheet broken, with reserves negative, minus $12.5 billion, and with an overhang of pesos that print money because of the interest rate at the high nominality of the economy. He promised a dollarization, and during the campaign, 1 week before the election, when a journalist asked him what to do what he recommended to somewhat that mass rolling CD, he said nothing. In pesos, nothing. The peso is a shit. That was the country, just to try to put in context. Well, after that, he won the election. I said a stabilization program, the only stabilization program that works in Argentina that got high inflation since mid-75 till the hyperinflation at the end of the 80s. The only program that works was the convertibility regime. That was in a context where most of the countries in the region go to stabilization programs. And the stabilization programs, I understand, needs the three axes of a triangle: a macro program, a micro program, and a governability program. In terms of governability, I think on the Congress, I think on the streets, but I mainly think on trying to extend the horizon of the economy, of the politics. That means that each government respects the contracts built by the other. That is something very simple, but in Argentina, never happened. Micro program, you need to increase the productivity of the economy because you need to open the economy. The Argentine economy is a very closed economy with very high prices for goods. And you need a fiscal consistency in the long term. That's the micro. So you need to improve productivity. And the macro program, well, he talks about dollarization, finally, and hopefully, he decided not to dollarize the economy. And he made a much more heterodox program in terms of that he keeps the capital controls, and he devalued the currency. He made a shock in the exchange rate from almost 120%. And in order to shock inflation up, inflation in December jumped from 12 to 25% monthly. With the jump in inflation, it helps him to close the fiscal deficit, mainly because of a dilution of expenditures, pensions, and also wages. He cut the public works almost near to zero. He cut transfer to provinces. He cut expenditures, 4.5% of GDP, and he reduced the fiscal deficit to near zero. I will talk later about the interest because that is another story. So he devalued the currency, he shocked the inflation, and then he used the exchange rate as an anchor with a crawling peg that at the beginning of the program, the minister said that it will be for just a few months, thinking that they will move to another exchange rate regime. And he also we have a split exchange market, the official currency and the blue chip swap currency. That is a market. It's not an illegal market. It is a market where you can buy dollars through buying and selling an asset, like a bond or a share. Well, he sent 20% of the total exports to the blue chip swap. So at the beginning, if you think which is the inheritance of Milei, I say it's a broken central bank balance sheet. Behind this, you have a very high inflation. You have extraordinary gap between the two exchange rates, the official and the financial. And you've got a strong distortion in relative prices. If you try to say it simple, you can say prices of goods very expensive, a very close economy. Utilities rates very cheap, and a dilution of wages and pensions that has been reducing when the economy increased inflation from the 25 to 200. So. And they have also a big debt for importers and a big debt for companies, for because of profits, that non-distribution profits. So at the beginning, they sent 20% of the export to the blue chip swap markets. That allowed to keep the gap close. And it was financing at the beginning with a schedule of payment of imports, an import payment schedules, 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, 120 days, that allows to pay half of imports in the first 4 months. That allows the central bank to buy a lot of dollars at the beginning, and that increased the reserves at the beginning. At that moment, Argentina hasn't got access to the credit, and because of the capital controls, we've got two markets, no? Pesos debt and dollar debt. Dollar debt was paying with reserves. We haven't got a rolling of the, and the pesos debt is paying because of the capital controls in an economy that got a negative interest rate, a local negative interest rate. So the capital controls allows to have a negative interest rates that allows at the beginning to buy reserves and to dilute the overhang of the pesos. What was the main problem for me? They keep the 20% of the export sending to the blue chip swap up to now. It continues. And at the same time, because of the crawling peg, they use the crawling peg at 2% with an inflation that reduced fast. But monthly, 25 in December, 20, 13, 11, 8.8 monthly. 4 months is at 4, and then it reduced to 2.4% in the last month. So with an inflation near 150% in the beginning, and a dollar that increased only 2% per month, you appreciate the currency again. So the imports increase, you pay the total months of imports, so you enter in a current account deficit in a cash basis, and the central bank stopped buying dollars in June. Since June to September, stopped buying dollars. They improve in the country risk that reduced to 2,600 at the beginning to 1,200, start increasing again. But at that time, what the program did was an amnesty tax that allows most of the informal economy to deposits, to increase deposits in the financial system. Near $23 billion enter to the financial system, and that allows to increase the credit to the private sector. Most of the companies in the economy took credit through the banking system or through debt in the market at very low rates. They sold a portion of the dollars to the central bank, and that allows the program to continue, and country risk reduced at a minimum of near 600 basis points, and the program seems that continues, but with a current account deficit, strong current account deficit. What's happened now? I think that the amnesty tax reduced. You haven't got the same amount of debt, but at the same time, they continue saying that they are, what they say, they continue saying that they reduce the crawling peg from 2% to 1%, and they start talking about a fixed exchange rate. Milei specifically said that he talked about the inflation push because of the crawling peg, and he said that once inflation goes to the crawling peg, he will reduce the crawling peg. No? He goes to a fixed exchange rate. At the same time, he said that the economy hasn't got pesos, mainly because he cleaned the central bank balance sheets in terms of debt in pesos. But the main thing is that he doesn't clean it. What he do is he move the debt held by the central bank, held by the treasury. You move the debt from one side to the other side. So at the end of the day, now the total debt held by the market is only 3% lower than the debt at the beginning. It's not too high, But the problem is that we haven't got access to credit. If we haven't got access to credit, you need to put more dollars to the economy to continue. That is why they are discussing with the IMF a new program. But the main discussion is the amount, the disbursement, and the exchange rate regime. In the last 2 weeks, the minister changed the speech, and up to that, he continues saying that the crawling peg continues, the exchange rate regime continues. In that speech, what he said is, we are bargaining with the IMF. And that is what happened in terms of the market, and the central bank starts selling a lot of debt, a lot of reserves, and we are in the middle of a little run, not a run. We have the SIPO, we have the capital controls, but the main thing is that most of Milei support, I said, the markets are seeing the fiscal figures, the central bank purchases, reserve dollar purchases, the nominality that was marked with the peg, with the crawling peg, and with the supply in the blue chip swap market, and the pools. So if you need to change the exchange rate regime, or to go to a more flexible exchange rate regime in order to have a higher exchange, well, the miracle in terms of reduction of inflation and the recovery of the economy, that again, we are recovering in a V shape, but returning to the same levels of 2022, the same of 2017, the same of 2015, the same of 2012. We are at the same level. Well, we are in the middle of a discussion with the IMF. We expect a program with the IMF, but of course, we have the market trying to understand which is the next exchange rate regime, and we are in the middle of a run. So I said, again, no, he got a macro program, but I think they need to move. We can't float. The country can't float without reserves. But if you peg we've got the same problem with the convertibility regime. In terms of micro reforms, we are doing micro reforms, but not enough to get the appreciation of the currency. And in terms of the governability, well, the streets are calm. The Congress is not closed, but he is governed through executive orders and not through laws. But the main thing is the last, to extend the horizon. 2 months ago, I said that this could work if Milei is the next emperor of the country. In a democracy, this is difficult, but well, I cut here. Sorry.
Thank you, Marina. Now we'll hear from Nicolas Dujovne.
Well, hello to everyone, and thanks for the invitation, Nicolas, and for organizing this event. So, what I would like to do in this 15 minutes, let me start the clock, is to give you some background to try to understand better what coalition in Argentina has to be broken in order to prosper. You know, in Argentina, after decades of failure, a pro-statu quo coalition was built, a coalition that tries to defend something that is becoming smaller and smaller and smaller. And Milei or other reformist government will be successful if Milei, in this case, or other administration is able to break this statu quo. So some background, which I think is relevant, even is his history, but I will go to Milei rapidly. So, since 1975, GDP per capita in Argentina grew just 25%. So just 25% higher than in 1975. South Korea, in the same period of time, between 1975 and 1925, multiplied its per capita GDP 9 times, okay? 9 times. One of the cases of, underdeveloped nation that became a developed one. Chile multiplied its per capita GDP by 4, Brazil by 3, Mexico and the US by 2, Argentina 25%. Okay, so basically we grew at 2% while the world was growing at 3.5. If we compute not just the per capita GDP but overall GDP. So we are speaking first of a long wave of deterioration, and this has deep roots. Total factor productivity. If we compare what was productivity in Argentina in 1960, well, productivity in Argentina now is 15% below where it was in 1960, as measured by total factor productivity. So in a base of 100, we are at 85. The US is at 160. Okay, so that explains the relative trend of wages in Argentina as compared to wages in the rest of the world. So, and another number that is relevant. In the 60s, the share of Argentinian exports in the world GDP was 1%. Now it's 0.3. Okay, so the participation in Argentina in overall world trade also shrunk to 1/3 to what it was. So the economy was more and more closed and regulated because the reaction of Argentina to the lack of success was, okay, let's protect what we have, rather than change and remove the basis of our decay. So trade barriers were implemented to promote inward investment. So why don't we, hike trade tariffs to make the companies to come to invest to Argentina? Well, that does not work very well, because by doing that, Argentina was able to promote a couple of industries producing inputs, steel, aluminum, but that condemned all the producers of final goods to a total under protection. So exports in Argentina, of course, faltered. At the same time, as the fiscal deficit was rampant and growing, inflation, of course, was high. The response to that, of course, was not fixing the fiscal, but rather introducing price controls. There was a growing role of the state-owned enterprises in the economy until the 90s. Another interesting thing is, if you compare investment to GDP in Argentina, not only now, but for many, many years, of course, investment in Argentina was not that low, was similar to the one of the US, if we look to investment to GDP, half of the Asian rates of investment, but the productivity of the investment in Argentina was much lower. Why? Because, the price signals on where to invest in Argentina were wrong, as the economy was closed. There was a lot of corruption. So even with the same ratio of capital stock to GDP per occupied worker in Argentina, the productivity in Argentina was very, very poor, while in other countries with that level of investment was enough to grow 3-4%, not the 7, 8, or 9 that the Asian countries experienced for many, many years. So we have persistent deficits, negative real rates, of course, because if we have positive real rates, the economists in Argentina call that carry trade, and that's poison. And we need, decades of positive carry trade to generate a vibrant capital market in Argentina, in which the population starts to save in our domestic currency. And of course, once we had a crisis, rather than fixing the fiscal, with some exceptions, we imposed capital controls. And the same reaction was implemented not in the capital markets, but on the labor market. So once we had recessions and problems in the labor market, what we did was to enhance labor protection. And that, of course, was great to protect the actual jobs, but not to create new ones. So that drove Argentina to, a very entrenched political economy problem, which is still present and we need to solve. We have a pro-statu quo coalition, unions, and the protected manufacturing industry, which is, much higher, much bigger, much powerful than the one disorganized coalition of the businessman that suffer the state, suffer the level of taxes, suffer, the disorganization, suffers the lack of capital markets, the lack of credit. An example of an aberration in Argentina that can provide some color. We have something called the Tierra del Fuego regime. In the 70s, due to geopolitical reasons, the military created a special tax regime for promoting a reallocation of population to the south. So if the population living in the southern part of Argentina was not going to pay tariffs if they import a car, and companies exporting to the continent will not pay VAT and corporate tax. But that was for some specific activities that were to be determined by the authorities. But many years after, and after Argentina resolved its frictions with Chile in its disputes for the limits in La Patagonia, well, the regime was deepened. So basically, there are two companies importing kits of mobile phones, of TVs, refrigerators, and then sending them to the continent in a regime in which they capture the rents of not paying VAT, corporate income tax. This lobby is that powerful that they manage even to increase the excise tax that to be paid by these goods should they are bought in the continent, so as to generate an even larger price differential between the goods produced, quote, because they are imported from Asia and exported to the continent. The only time that was confronted was under Macri administration, when we equate the excise tax that was paid in the continent with the one paid in Tierra del Fuego, and also in that administration tariffs on notebooks were reduced to zero so as to reduce prices. But well, that's an example of a coalition protected businessmen, unions. By the way, in Argentina, if you speak about an industry, the only industry is the manufacturing industry. The other industries, financial industry, leisure industry, are not industries. They are not as morally good as the manufacturing industry, which is, the industry. So Argentina is a history of macro volatility. We had growth until the 70s, a very deep crisis in the 80s, a recovery in the 90s, a crash that was described at the end of the 2000s, a recovery with the commodity boom in the early 2000s, and stagnation since 2010. Okay, I have to run now. But, I would say that Argentina did not have, at the same time, and for many consecutive years, 4 policies that are present in many cases of success of countries doing well in emerging markets. So first, a sound institutional framework with checks and balances and no corruption. Second, fiscal prudence. Third, a flexible exchange rate and positive rates implemented by the central bank as a way to promote domestic savings. And fourth, opening up the economy. I'm not saying that opening the economy in 1 year, but for example, moving into free trade agreements and to give the signal that Argentina is moving into that direction. I would say that these 4 policies, were present under Macri's administration, but okay, lasted just 4 years. During Menem, yes, he opened up the economy. Yes, it was fiscally prudent, but we decided to implement, a fixed exchange rate regime that, at the end of the day, blew out after, the Russian default and the Asian crisis, and at the same time that most of our trading partners were implementing inflation targeting regimes with flexible exchange rates. But that was a lost opportunity. And then entering into Milei and the challenges. Okay, so apart from this long-term history of this pro-statu quo coalition, then we had the extra problem of the Kirchnerismo in Argentina. The Kirchnerismo in Argentina from 2006 to 2015 drove the government expenditure from a consolidated level in terms of GDP from 25 to 42. So they almost doubled the size of the government in just 9 years. That's a history of a macroeconomic homicide, never seen in the contemporary history. So that generated a trap. Under Macri's presidency, we managed to drive that down from 42 to 36. Hiking the price of the utilities, bringing down government expenditure, but we lost elections. Then Alberto Fernandez came, the next administration. They again rose the government expenditure to 39, and Milei. The departing point for Milei was a government expenditure of 39. Argentina cannot collect 39% of the GDP in taxes. It's very difficult for a country with the level of per capita GDP of Argentina to collect that level of taxes. But in the very first year of Milei, incredibly, he reduced the size of the consolidated expenditure, considering not only the national administration plus the provinces, from 39 to 32, roughly. So for the first time since 2008, Argentina is financing its budget with taxes, not with the reserves of the central bank, not by issuing net debt, not by printing money. That's very, very important. So, of course, there are many pending issues to confront in Argentina. We still have 7-8 percentage points of highly distortive taxes that cascades, generating a lot of problems for exporters, very high taxes on labor, taxes on exports. So Argentina needs to resolve that, and in order to doing that, Argentina needs second and third generation reforms. So, Argentina will not be able to continue reducing the government expenditure without a social security reform. Argentina needs a labor reform. Argentina needs a tax reform also that starts to show the path for eliminating all these distortive taxes. So Milei did great in bringing down the deficit and the government expenditure. Primary expenditure this year in Argentina contracted close to 27% in real terms on the national administration, 20% in the provinces. There are little precedents, in my view, in the recent history of countries that did the same. What we need also is to, as he resolved so rapidly on the fiscal, Argentina needs to show what the permanent regime will be in terms of monetary effects. So as Argentina can start to accumulate reserves, liquidity at the central bank is negative, and that explains in a big part why Argentina is still yielding 13-14% in dollars. The other component, of course, is political risk. But with this type of cost of capital, it will be very difficult to see an investment boom in the short run. Argentina needs to resolve that. I don't want to take more time, so we can move to Q&A. But just to finish, I would say that I think that there are reasonable perspectives that this experiment can work if Argentina moves rapidly towards lifting parts of the capital controls. That will be, in my view, the only way for the central bank to regain liquidity and to promote investment. And Milei should focus on generating results. The only way in which the population will vote either for Milei or for another pro-capitalist government in 2027 will be if they see positive results of these type of policies. So he needs to focus not in this midterm, but rather in delivering for 2027. That means that we need to bring down inflation rate and to promote growth in 26 and 27. And if he has to pay some cost this year while he lifts capital controls, I will advise him to do so. But I will stop here, and thanks.
Thank you, Nicolas, and thank you to all of our speakers for your presentations. Now we will move on to the Q&A session. I will use my privilege as a moderator to ask the first question, but we encourage you, all of you, to start forming a queue behind the microphones. Both of them are working? And, well, then we will go to questions from the public. You are all invited to participate. Many of you mentioned that Milei holds considerable public support, and a big part of that support seems to come from the fact that he managed to reduce inflation. Looking ahead, and so once the effect of that controlling inflation has on public support, once that effect settles, what would you say is the next key economic outcome that Milei's administrations will have to deliver to sustain a large amount of public support and not to lose governability and political control. Nicolas, you mentioned that he needs to promote growth in 26 and 27, but if you and the rest of our speakers can expand on that.
I take this very briefly. Since 2011, Argentina did not grow 2 consecutive years. If even with distortive taxes, but if Argentina continues with this fiscal discipline and manages to transition to a credible, new monetary regime, Argentina will be in a position of seeing growth after the growth that we will see in 2025. So in 2026, 2027, the economy continues to grow. That will be something new for the contemporary recent history of Argentina. That can generate a lot of job creation and be a game changer, and the type of result that the society will be waiting at the end of voting in 2027.
Yes. You need to access to credit. Without credit, it doesn't work, because the fiscal dominance exists. You close the fiscal deficit, but you need to pay the maturities. You are printing money to buy the dollars to pay the maturities of dollar debt, and you are printing money to pay the pesos debt that are rolling lower than 100%. So you need a fiscal, a financial, and a monetary program. The main problem is that the markets are looking not only the fiscal figures, they are looking the central bank reserves, and with this present exchange regime, they never buy dollars. They need dollars. You need to put dollars in the economy to continue. It's like a car. With fuel, it works. Without fuel, it doesn't work. Well, when you put dollars of the amnesty, well, it works. What Caputo did was a miracle. He works 1 year and 3 months without access to credit, paying dollars debt. But you need to roll. And the main thing is that if you move the exchange regime, well, what happened with inflation and what happened with... so I think that the settlement of the program, to keep the crawling peg for much longer than they need, and mainly the blend, sending 20% of the export to the blue chip swap, I think it was a mistake. But well, I don't know. You need access to credit. Without credit, it doesn't work.
So we have growth, access to credit. Any other?
No, I think the fight against inflation is not over, because the success was under a crawling peg and under capital controls. So we are discussing right now, perhaps the timing the government was thinking was to have this discussion after the midterm election, and now it's happening now, on how to complement these fiscal results that have to be maintained with some new being discussed exchange rate regime, and the challenge is to keep inflation down under that regime and lifting the capital controls. It doesn't sound to me that difficult. That's why I am optimistic, even if, as Nicolas suggested, it means sacrificing some political results in this midterm election, because once those capital controls are lifted and under some floating, probably some dirty floating regime or some other combination, I think that the country risk is going to go down, and we might get again access to the capital markets, and and I think there is going to be growth under that regime. But still there is a transition to be that we need to go through, and without any political crisis in the middle. That's the challenge.
Just briefly, from a non-economist point of view, I think one of the things that like is implied, especially about what Ernesto was saying, it's like you are, to make this transition possible, you are politically and socially de-incorporating middle classes that benefit from these non-tradable shielded sectors that had to do with the traditional coalition that protects and pushes for the traditional political economy of Argentina. So you need growth to set off those and reduce those transition costs. But also, I mean, you need like politics, right? And like part of the, I think, Milei's success had to do with this very heavy opposition to the casta and with the association between the casta and inflation. And that's why I think he still needs to do well in the midterm, because if he doesn't do well, I mean, and he has been doing this already, to make the reforms that he needs to make and to get them rolling, I mean, he needs to deal with the casta and with people from the casta, and that eventually will start to take a toll at some point, right? I mean, you are already having like people and deals with people that is very casta-like and very like associated to the casta. If he doesn't like make this transition rapidly, and at the same time he gets kind of like touched by the casta too much, that will make the political game much more difficult for him, in my view.
Thank you. We have a first question from the public.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay, works. First of all, as a fellow River, I was going to say Argentinian, but fellow River Platian, I would like to thank you for being here. And I wanted to pick your brain, in which I think are two challenges the Milei administration might be facing in the near future. The first one is, unfortunately or fortunately, this panel started at the same time that Trump was making his Liberation Day announcements. So I'm sure everyone's cell phone was going nuts with people talking about this or tweets or stuff like that. And I would like to at least get your opinion on how much of Milei's success will depend on what happens in these international capital financial markets, given the volatility that we've been experiencing in the last, let's say, 2 months. So, I mean, maybe it's negative because uncertainty is always bad, but maybe it's positive because Milei is also in Washington right now. And the second challenge that I think about is, a lot of you mentioned this pendulum of Argentina, right? So we go from one extreme in the left to one extreme in the right. And all of you mentioned that we need deep, let's say, reforms. We need liberalizing the economy. We have all these like tariffs and non-tariff barriers, regulations. But those are going to benefit the economy if they're perceived as permanent. If they see, okay, if I'm a firm and I'm going to invest, I'm only going to invest if, for example, you change my rules permanently. I'm going to buy capital goods from abroad, import them, if you promise me that I won't have to go back to my local monopoly in 4 years if you lose the elections. Right? So I wanted to pick your brains on what do you think are the, let's say, what are the roles of these two challenges? This international context, especially this uncertainty generated by Trump's and tariffs, and this perception of whether this is permanent or not, especially from the point of view of Argentina, like the Argentinian streets, la calle.
I would like to start by the second one. And the only way in which reforms can be permanent is if they have popular support. The countries in which reforms at the end of the day persisted occurred because the population decided, okay, now I want something more center-left or more center-right, but the central bank will continue to be prudent and independent, and the economy will continue to be open, and we will discuss, education financing and social security, So for that to occur, first the reforms has to be successful, and that occurred in Chile, in Peru, in Brazil, and that's why the population demands from the politicians that some pillars will not be. So, in that sense, the only way in which this will work is if Argentina grows in the next 3 years or performs well. If not, the pendulum will come back again. In year 2001. In the midst of the end of the currency peg, the Argentinian Congress voted something called the Ley de Intangibilidad de los Depósitos, the law declaring that the deposits will be untouchable by the. Of course, 3 months after, deposits were rescheduled. So it is not a law. Yes, once you have the pillars and the population support them, if you can have constitutional reforms so as to increase the level of majorities to modify those pillars, that will be great. And that's what saved Peru with his last president Castillo, that was a former supporter of Sendero Luminoso, but the Peru resisted because of Velarde at the central bank. So that's on the second. And on the first one, Argentina comes from such a bad situation that for the next few years can have a very idiosyncratic behavior. So in my view, it will be somehow less correlated with what can happen with the world than other countries that are more on a steady state. That's my view.
Argentina got a combination of bad luck and bad decisions. We use a phrase that said that when things abroad works well, everything is okay. When things abroad goes wrong, you have nothing to do. But sometimes when things abroad goes well, we take decisions, we work and try to break the things. That is what happened with the Kirchnerismo. But I think that you need that things works if the convertibility regime and in another way, probably the Kirchnerismo never exists. But at the same time, I think that what you need is politicians' works on the transitions, like Cardoso and Lula. That's not Macri and Alberto Fernández. Or like the Concertación after the Pinochet regime. They never broke. Or like in Uruguay, when they decide to pay the debt, when they've got holdouts, the same like in Argentina. They decide to pay the debt. And they fix the problem 10 years before, in advance, with a lower cost. So I think the world, of course, I don't know where the world will be now. Probably the dollar, but I don't know. 4 months ago, we assumed that the Trump politics will generate inflation and interest rate will go down lower, and that means a higher dollar. The dollar index at that time was 110. Now, I don't know today, but it is near 103. And I'm not sure that after China's decision, the dollar will be the strong currency. So if you peg to the dollar and the dollar weak, you can work. I don't know. But if not, you see, during the 90s, the problem of the convertibility regime was the peg, but the main problem was the dollar strongness and the crisis in Asia, Russia, Ecuador, Brazil, etc., etc.
My phone was vibrating, but I couldn't. I don't know what was announced in Liberation Day, but I'm worried. If we have the world into stagflation, make it a combination of stagnation and inflation, that's bad news for Argentina. We may have some good news if that improves the chances of someday an agreement between Mercosur and the European Union. That's the only, perhaps, positive side. But I think it's, if there is a stagnation and a global recession, that's bad news. On the second question, I'm perhaps a little bit optimistic on we haven't mentioned much, but there is now a new Ministry of Deregulation run by Federico Sturzenegger, and he's lifting hundreds of regulations, and some of them were imposed by lobbies in the present. Some of them remain from lobbies from the past. Some ridiculous regulations which are at the micro level maybe quite expensive, and maybe because somebody 50 years ago was the cousin of the Ministry of Agriculture at that point or something like that. I try to be optimistic that because that people are dead, it's not that easy that after this, all of that regulation will come back. Maybe some of them, from the people who are still alive, come back, but some of them don't. We'll see.
Just briefly on the pendulum. My sense is that it has been permanent, right? Like O'Donnell 76, wrote a piece that was called something like State and Alliances in Argentina, where he looked at two coalitions alternating since the 40s, right? The Pampa coalition, which was raw material producers, and the non-tradable import substitution coalition, right? And the pendulum was essentially instigated by balance of payment crisis, right? I don't see much of a difference of what has been happening in Argentina in recent decades. What might be new, and I don't know how it will play it out, is you now have oil, mining. There's a different set of raw materials with a different political economy that might change things. The other thing has to do with there is a crack, in my sense, on the capacity to clientelistically encapsulate the poor and electorally mobilize the poor through clientelism because of what this kind of mejorismo thing, and I don't know if that will stick or not, but that also opens up a possibility for a new political economy, but I don't know where it's heading.
Yes. Hi, everybody. Can you hear me? Yes. Yes or no? Okay. So my first question is actually very similar to the one that our fellow member here asked, but I'm gonna emphasize again the political part. So we know that Milei is considered a populist by definition, or a neo-populist in the right. So how is Donald Trump, very short, kind of chaotic, impulsive, controversial term, going to influence Milei in the future? But more than economic aspects, I'm talking about in terms of check and balances, authoritarian tendencies, and billionaire government link. So we see now that in Europe, people are looking at Trump as a warning sign in terms of neo-populist leaders, outsiders, or very far-right candidates that can actually be seen as a dangerous president. So I want to ask that question. more in political terms. And then my second question has to do with the way Milei is trying to tackle the economics problems in Argentina. So is addressing Argentina's inflation or hyperinflation by implementing austerity measures the only shortcut to a better well-being? Can this be done at the expense of inequality and poverty reduction in the hopes that in the long term, everybody will be better off? Everybody will be better in economic terms and in other terms. So yeah, these are my two questions. Thank you.
I can say something about like the Milei versus Trump. I think there is a difference between Milei and Trump. Milei is much more liberal, at least in terms of his narrative, than Trump. I'm essentially thinking about the wokeism and the kind of like the cultural battle. I mean, I said that people in the Milei coalition kind of overstepped, and he at the Davos conference also, I mean, overstepped, but he doesn't need to get into that type of rhetoric or like platform and to be able to maintain support. And he hasn't. He didn't need to do that to win the election. So I would say, well, I mean, he's a crazy guy. I mean, he has her haircut is similar to Trump, but I wouldn't like overemphasize the how similar they are. My sense is that he's also more constrained than Trump is. And at the same time, I mean, he's becoming a model for other Latin American leaders that seek to go with similar reforms in terms of particularly reforming the state, right? So I don't know. We have to wait and see how this plays out. Perhaps, I mean, I'm not familiar with this. I mean, but something that we need to wait in for, like to look at, or when we look at the U.S., is that this is kind of a falling empire, right? I mean, something that we don't usually, I think, articulate completely is that you have China, you have India, you have Russia there, right? And perhaps one of Milei's mistakes, again, looking from outside and with very imperfect information, is that he has tried to get too close to Trump when perhaps he has more opportunities in trying to deal with or make business with other rising powers. So I don't know.
I will try to answer the second question. I think that rebuild the currency and rebuild the credit in an economy that broke both, it's a must. You can't run a country without a currency and without credit. Of course, there are costs behind that. And the main question is that cost. You pay the cost in order to rebuild the credit and the currency, or you will have another crisis, and which is the economy that you will have behind that. So in terms of the fiscal consolidation, the way you need to do the fiscal consolidation soon. That is a must. But the way you do the fiscal consolidation is diluting the incomes, pensions, and wages. You have people that work in the state with very low productivity, but you also have, teachers, you have doctors, you have, so if you see what you do with the incomes, for example, just a number, when Nicolas tried to pass the bill through the Congress in order to change the pension mobility, pensions in terms of GDP was 9.6%. Last year, only 6%. And the purchasing power of pensions reduced near 33%. And you send most of the pensionists lower the poverty line. And you have something similar with, so you need to, I said, not to destroy the state. And I think that's the message of Milei. He said, I am the topo that will destroy the state inside. You need to recreate the state, to increase the productivity of the state. And I think this discussion doesn't exist. The main question behind is what you do with the tax system and the informal economy. If you see the lobby in Argentina, I always say the same. Half of everything is taxes. Half of a car, half of a... But the public sector collects only 27 percentage points. So you have a very high black economy, and you also have a black economy in the labor system. You have only 6 million people in the formal sector, 3 in the public sector, in an economy with an active population near 22 million people. So you need to recreate the way the state works. In the middle, you have some sectors, as Juan Pablo said, with high productivity, mining in the world, mining, vaca muerta, etc. But you will have, and you have sectors that are growing fast, the gig economy, Rappi, Pedioya, but in the middle, you have nothing. So there are decisions that, what I say is that the social contract is broken in a federal economy. So it is much more difficult to recreate these things because you need to have consensus with the provinces.
I think I disagree with part of what you said or what I understood from what you said. The priority is not to transform the state. The priority is to reduce, to come back to fiscal equilibrium. That is the priority, and that means it doesn't mean a recession, and this is why the economy is going to grow this year. It means moving resources from public employment and from pensioners, which are more or less in the middle class, particularly state employees were they did extremely well during the pandemic relative to people in the private sector, particularly to informal employees in the private sector. And by reducing the fiscal expenditures, the money printing was reduced and inflation was reduced. So you reduce inflationary tax mainly on the poor. And that explains the support of Milei. So this has not been a program against the poor. And this is why the poor are not against Milei. This was somewhat against mainly on the middle class. When I was talking about poverty, our old people, the pensioners in Argentina, are not poor. The fraction of poor in the pensioners is something like 9% or 13%. The fraction of poor of children in poverty is something like 56%. I mean, it is crazy. So the poor are the children, not the old. On the second question, on your first question, I was making an analogy at the very beginning between Trump and Milei on how they got to power. In economic terms, there are some similarities. They are both trying to reduce the size of the state, but in international economy, I think there is a big difference, which is that, again, without looking at my telephone today, Trump is trying to close the American economy, and Milei is trying to open the Argentine economy. So that's a big difference.
Well, we are almost out of time, but we are over time, but we start late, so we are a bit over time, but we started late, so we will allow for 2 final questions.
To them later.
Okay,
So.
then we will allow for 1 more question.
Perfect. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. My main question was that I found very interesting you mentioned the budget went out of deficit by reducing government expenditure, but in more like practical terms, this meant that like 30 ministries were closed and then replaced by like secretarias instead. Many like public workers got their contracts terminated, which is definitely a way to reduce expenditure and aligns with Milei's perspective of reducing the size of the state more generally. But this was also an aspect of concern within the region, like the question of whether the state was going to be able to fulfill all its like roles and obligations in a more social aspect while balancing macroeconomic policy. So I wanted to ask, what are your thoughts on this, and if you think that the Milei administration has found a good balance between macroeconomic stability and fulfilling this more social roles that the state also has to fulfill? Or is there a prioritization of macroeconomic policy over more social obligations? And do you think they're having any like observed consequences out of this reduction of the state size that go beyond economic policy?
I started saying before that if you have, without a stabilization of the economy, without the creation of the currency and the credit, the economy is shrinking. So you need to do the program. And if you see what the Kirchnerismo did with the size of the state, they increased it from 25% of GDP during the convertibility regime to 41.5%. And the increase was in transfers to families, pensions and subsidies to the private sector. So you need to do something with this size of the. Now it's down to 30%. That was the last figure. I understand that you don't need to, because if were for Milei, he will reduce it to near zero. I don't know. I think that the social contract includes the states, includes public services, public works, So in order to stabilize the economy, you need to close the fiscal deficit soon in order to avoid printing money. You need to stop printing money. If not, nothing works. But at the end of the day, you need to do something with this, because the most interesting thing of the present stabilization is that they reduce income because of the hike in inflation, and they're not how can I say huelgas? Paros, strokes, strikes. Of course,
We have one next week.
yes, but nothing happened. If you see what happened with Alfonsín or in the past.
If I may add, maybe I think that we all agree here in this panel that a very positive aspect of the fiscal adjustment of this year is that inflation came down, and it's planting the seeds for an eventual permanent reduction in the inflation rate, and of course that has positive impacts in terms of reduction in poverty. But at the same time, part of the reductions in the government expenditure will not be sustainable. For example, public works. Typically in Argentina, in years of fiscal profligacy, the government spent 2 percentage points of the GDP in public works. When in the middle of process of adjustment, that went down to 1.2, 1.3. In 2024, Argentina spent 0.3, nothing. So of course, if you maintain 0.3 of expenditure in public works, all the highways will deteriorate up to a point in which cars will start to crash and the people will start to die. So that cannot be sustained. It can be replaced for a scheme in which the public sector participates, but that's something that will have to change. The actual level of payments for the retirees on the Social Security, especially for the people that receives the minimum payment, is too low in terms of the calories that they can consume. So of course that's something that is something that should be modified. In that aspect, as that's the most important item in terms of the government expenditure of the national administration, what we need is to have a social security reform, one in which we address the problem, the long-run problems of the social security by modifying the age of retirement, by eliminating some privileges, and that will allow to increase the payments for the minimum salaries on social security. But yes, there are many parts of the fiscal adjustment that are not sustainable in the long run.
Just this is a question. I mean, but like my main question about like Milei's censo is, isn't this kind of like similar to like dropping weight by losing muscle? I mean, I fear like that's what we might be seeing here. So you end up with a state that is lighter but less capable. And so how do you recraft the social contract without a capable state? It's very difficult to do, right? At the same time, I mean, you can make up for that for some time with economic growth if you are able to eventually create sustainable growth. But we know growth needs institutions, and you are essentially eating up institutional capacity as well, right? And that's, I guess, kind of like the trap at the medium term, I think.
But unfortunately, this growth in the size of the state in Argentina from 25 to 42, it was all fat. No muscle.
Yeah, that's fine.
Nothing. Security didn't improve, health didn't improve, education didn't improve, public infrastructure didn't improve. It was all lost. No, there was no muscle at all. So if it was no muscle from 25 to 42, I'm not sure we're losing muscle on the way back.
It depends what you're cutting.
Yeah, no, it depends. But the other way, it was not that we became Finland.
No, that's clear.
It was not that,
we are
okay,
all in agreement with that.
there is more, you pay more, I pay more taxes, but then I send my kid to public school, to the public hospital, I feel safe in the street. No, you pay more taxes and you get nothing back.
That's why he went.
Thank you, everyone. I don't know if this is on. Thank you to our audience, to our speakers. Thank you, everyone. I'm sorry we have run out of time. Thank you to our speakers, to our audience for their questions, and thank you once again to the Institute for the Study of International Development at McGill. Thank you very much.